Have you ever put down the phone after talking with someone and felt completely drained? Or maybe you've written a check to help a family member, only to wonder later if you were somehow talked into it. Perhaps someone treated you like you suddenly lost all your smarts the day you retired? If any of this sounds familiar, you're definitely not alone. In this video, we're talking about something that affects almost everyone as they get older, yet few people discuss openly: the 5 types of people you need to watch out for in your later years. Now, this isn't about becoming suspicious or pulling away from meaningful relationships. It's actually the opposite. By learning to spot potentially harmful patterns early, you make more room for the genuine, nourishing connections that make life rich and meaningful after 70. The real wisdom isn't avoiding all risks. It's developing good judgment about which relationships truly deserve your valuable time and energy. Throughout history, older people have been respected precisely because they combine knowledge with good judgment, the ability to see past appearances to deeper truths. In this video, we'll tap into that good judgment as we explore relationship patterns that research shows become especially important as we age. Let's start with the first type of person to be careful around: people who manipulate your emotions. These relationships often start out wonderfully, but slowly shift into something that leaves you feeling confused, guilty, or somehow less than after spending time together. Unlike clearly abusive behavior that's easy to spot, emotional manipulation works in subtler ways, creating situations where you find yourself constantly walking on eggshells, doubting your own judgment, or always putting someone else's needs before your own well-being. What makes these people so hard to identify is their step-by-step approach. The manipulation rarely happens overnight. Instead, it develops gradually through a series of small incidents that might seem unimportant on their own, but create a troubling pattern over time. A comment here that undermines your confidence, a reaction there that seems way out of proportion, slowly creating an environment where you're constantly adjusting your behavior to keep the peace or avoid conflict. Research suggests that psychological and emotional manipulation may actually be more common than financial exploitation among people over 70, yet it's reported far less often. Why? Often because it leaves no visible marks, and because many of us were raised with values that discourage making waves or speaking poorly of family members and close friends. Think about this situation. You mention wanting to take a trip to visit an old friend in another state. Rather than being supportive, the person responds with excessive worry about your ability to travel safely, reminds you of recent health issues you've mostly recovered from, or subtly suggests your friend might find the visit a burden, all framed as loving concern. After enough of these conversations, you may find yourself giving up plans that would bring you joy, increasingly deferring to others' judgments about what you can or should do. The sure sign of emotional manipulation is how it leaves you feeling afterward, confused about your own wants and needs, unreasonably guilty about setting normal boundaries, or constantly monitoring your behavior to avoid triggering negative reactions from the other person. If these feelings sound familiar, it may be time to look more closely at certain relationships. Protecting yourself starts with trusting your emotional responses. That unsettled feeling after certain interactions isn't an overreaction. It's your inner wisdom sending important signals. Pay attention to patterns rather than isolated incidents. Does this dynamic repeat across multiple interactions? Do you consistently feel diminished after spending time with this person? Setting clear boundaries becomes essential with emotional manipulators. This might start with simple statements. I understand you're concerned about my travel plans, but I've made my decision and I'm comfortable with it. I need some time to think about this before I commit. I'm not available to discuss this topic right now. Remember that you don't need to justify or explain your boundaries at length. Relationship experts call this avoiding JADE: justify, argue, defend, explain. For many of us who spent decades prioritizing harmony and others' needs, setting boundaries may initially feel uncomfortable or even selfish. Yet boundaries aren't walls that disconnect us. They're healthy guidelines that actually create the conditions for more authentic relationships. By clearly communicating what's acceptable to you and what isn't, you create possibilities for more honest connections. The second type of person requiring caution is the financial exploiter. While we might prefer not to think about this issue, perhaps because it touches on both our financial independence and our trust in others, understanding how to protect ourselves from financial exploitation becomes increasingly important as we age. Financial exploitation of older adults has reached epidemic levels in our society. According to the National Council on Aging, financial abuse costs older Americans approximately $36.5 billion every year. Yet these statistics only capture reported cases. Experts believe that for every case documented, as many as 44 go unreported. The reasons for this underreporting often involve embarrassment, fear of losing independence, or concerns about family conflicts, particularly when the exploitation involves someone close to us. What makes financial exploitation particularly troubling is that it frequently comes disguised as care, concern, or assistance. Unlike obvious scams from strangers, which we might be more on guard against, financial exploitation often develops gradually within established relationships where trust already exists. This might involve family members, caregivers, friends, or even professional advisors who slowly begin to influence or control financial decisions in ways that mainly benefit themselves. The patterns often begin subtly. Offers to help with online banking or bill paying that gradually expand into controlling access to accounts. Suggestions that you're too trusting with others, but should trust them completely with financial matters. Expressions of concern about your spending that evolve into monitoring or restricting your access to your own resources. Or emotional pressure around financial decisions, particularly regarding inheritance or asset distribution. Research indicates that approximately 90% of reported financial exploitation cases involve someone the older adult knows well. Adult children account for about 33% of these cases, followed by other family members, caregivers, and neighbors or friends. This reality can make the situation particularly painful to acknowledge and address, as it involves confronting betrayals by people we care about deeply. Protecting yourself from financial exploitation requires a balanced approach that maintains independence while creating appropriate safeguards. Keeping financially literate becomes increasingly important as we age. Even if you've delegated certain financial tasks to others, staying generally informed about your assets, income streams, and expenses creates a foundation for spotting potential problems early. Consider setting up a system of checks and balances for financial management. This might include arranging for bank statements to be sent both electronically and in paper form, having a trusted person other than your primary financial helper periodically review accounts, or establishing specific thresholds beyond which transactions require additional approval. Many banks now offer special account features designed specifically to protect older customers, such as monitoring services that flag unusual activity or notification systems that alert a designated person about certain transactions. Legal arrangements can also provide significant protection. A properly structured, durable power of attorney allows you to specify exactly what financial decisions another person can make on your behalf and under what circumstances those powers activate. Similarly, a revocable living trust can provide for management of assets while incorporating oversight mechanisms. Working with an elder law attorney to establish these protections before they're needed can prevent exploitation later. The third relationship pattern to be mindful of is what relationship experts call the chronic taker. Unlike more obvious forms of mistreatment, this relationship pattern can persist for years, even decades, slowly draining your emotional resources, time, and sometimes finances without ever creating a clear moment of crisis that demands action. Chronic takers operate from a fundamental imbalance in relationship give and take. While healthy relationships involve a natural back and forth that fluctuates over time, chronic takers consistently position themselves as recipients of care, attention, resources, or emotional support, while rarely, if ever, giving back in meaningful ways. What makes these relationships particularly complex for our generation is that many of us were raised with values that emphasized selflessness, particularly for women, as a core virtue. We learned to find significant meaning in caring for others, sometimes at our own expense. Research confirms that this pattern becomes particularly problematic as we age. A long-term study found that while balanced, reciprocal relationships contribute significantly to well-being and longevity in later life. Persistently one-sided relationships become increasingly harmful to physical and emotional health over time. The researchers noted that the negative effects of these unbalanced relationships actually intensified after age 70, suggesting that our capacity to sustain one-sided dynamics diminishes as we age. What makes chronic takers particularly difficult to recognize is that they rarely present as deliberately selfish people. Often, they've developed sophisticated, if unconscious, strategies for maintaining their receiver status. These might include creating constant crises that demand attention, positioning themselves as uniquely vulnerable or suffering, or offering token gestures of reciprocity that fall far short of balancing the relationship but make confrontation seem ungrateful. The research on relationship reciprocity in later life highlights something important. What constitutes balance may look different across relationships and life stages. Reciprocity in older adulthood isn't about keeping exact score or expecting identical exchanges. It's about a mutual recognition of each other's value and needs expressed in ways appropriate to each person's circumstances. This might mean that a friend with physical limitations shows care through attentive listening rather than practical help, or that financial resources might be exchanged for emotional support. Protecting ourselves from chronic takers begins with the sometimes uncomfortable process of honestly assessing our relationships. After interactions with this person, do you consistently feel depleted rather than energized? Have you expressed needs that were ignored or minimized? Does maintaining this relationship require you to continually suppress your own needs or feelings? A yes answer to these questions may signal a chronically imbalanced dynamic. For many of us, addressing these imbalances doesn't necessarily mean ending relationships entirely, but rather transforming them through clearer communication and boundaries. This might begin with direct conversation. I've noticed our conversations tend to focus primarily on your concerns. I'd like to create more space for both of our experiences. Or it might involve more practical changes. I'm not able to drive you to appointments twice a week anymore, but I could arrange to join you once a month, or we could explore the senior transportation service together. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, chronic takers remain unwilling to participate in more balanced exchanges. In these cases, creating greater distance may become necessary for our well-being. This isn't selfishness. It's a recognition that at this stage of life, our emotional and physical resources are precious and limited. Allocating them wisely becomes not just a matter of personal preference, but of health and longevity. I'd like to pause here for a moment and invite you to reflect. Think about your own relationship patterns. Are there people in your life who consistently leave you feeling drained? What small step might you take this week to create more balance? Your insights and experiences matter. Consider sharing them in the comments below to continue this important conversation together. Now, let's turn to the fourth type of person to approach with caution: the constant negative influence. These are individuals whose persistent pessimism, criticism, or catastrophizing gradually affects your own outlook, emotional state, and even your physical health. Understanding this dynamic becomes particularly important as we age, when our resilience and emotional balance directly impact our quality of life and longevity. The science on this subject is both clear and compelling. Research in the field that studies how psychological processes influence our nervous and immune systems has shown that chronic exposure to negativity triggers stress responses that, over time, compromise immune function, heart health, and cognitive performance. A major study followed adults over 70 for 5 years and found that those who reported regular exposure to highly negative relationships experienced a measurable decline in cognitive function compared to peers with more positive social environments. What makes negative influences particularly concerning as we age is that their impact often compounds existing challenges. Many of the normal physical and social changes that accompany aging, from managing chronic conditions to adjusting to retirement or loss, already require significant emotional adaptation. When these natural challenges are consistently framed through a lens of criticism, catastrophe, or hopelessness by those around us, our adaptive capacity can become overwhelmed. Not all negative influences are obvious in their presentation. Some operate through more subtle mechanisms, such as consistently undermining confidence or selective attention to problems while dismissing positive developments. This kind of interaction, which psychologists sometimes call joy stealing, can be particularly insidious because it often comes wrapped in expressions of concern. The negative influence may position themselves as realistic, protective, or simply telling it like it is, making their impact harder to recognize and address. Yet, research shows that this constant undermining of positive experience or potential has measurable effects on everything from pain perception to recovery from illness. One study found that older adults exposed to pessimistic messaging about their conditions reported higher pain levels and required more medication than those surrounded by more balanced or optimistic perspectives. Similarly, research found that older adults exposed to negative stereotypes about aging performed worse on memory tasks and showed elevated stress responses compared to those exposed to positive or neutral aging narratives. Protecting ourselves from negative influences requires first recognizing these dynamics in our relationships. Some key indicators include: do you consistently feel deflated after interactions with certain people? Have you noticed yourself adopting pessimistic viewpoints that don't align with your natural outlook? Do certain relationships seem to amplify your worries rather than providing perspective or comfort? Answering yes to these questions may signal the presence of a negative influence in your life. Addressing these relationships doesn't necessarily mean elimination, though in some cases, creating distance may indeed be the healthiest choice. Often, more nuanced approaches can be effective. Setting conversational boundaries represents one such approach. I understand you're concerned, but I'm trying to maintain a more positive perspective on this situation. Or, more directly, I notice our conversations tend to focus heavily on problems and worries. I'd like to balance that with attention to what's going well. Another effective approach involves what psychologists call cognitive reframing, developing the habit of mentally translating negative narratives into more balanced perspectives. When exposed to someone's catastrophizing, everything is going downhill, we can silently reframe it. Some things are challenging while others are stable or improving. This internal dialogue helps create a psychological buffer against absorbing others' negativity. For some of us, protecting ourselves from negative influences may require more substantial changes in how we structure our social environments. This might mean reducing time with certain individuals while intentionally increasing exposure to those who maintain more balanced or constructive outlooks. It might also involve seeking new social connections through interest groups, volunteer opportunities, or community programs where the focus naturally tends toward engagement and purpose rather than complaint. It's worth noting that protecting ourselves from negative influences doesn't mean avoiding difficult realities or maintaining artificial positivity. Life's challenges, losses, and limitations deserve honest acknowledgement. The distinction lies in whether these acknowledgments serve as starting points for adaptation, problem-solving, and meaning-making, or whether they become endpoints that foster hopelessness, bitterness, or exaggerated fear. Fifth and the last, let's discuss the identity denier. As we journey through our 70s, 80s, and beyond, we carry with us a rich tapestry of experiences that have shaped who we've become. These experiences, our careers, relationships, accomplishments, mistakes, beliefs, and values, form the core of our identity and sense of self. Yet one of the most subtly damaging relationship dynamics we may encounter as we age involves interactions with individuals who consistently fail to recognize, respect, or engage with who we truly are. Identity denial takes various forms in later life. Sometimes it manifests as that condescending, simplified communication style that treats older adults as if cognitive decline were an inevitable aspect of aging rather than something that affects individuals differently. Other times, it appears as the systematic dismissal of our perspectives, expertise, or life experience, treating decades of acquired wisdom as somehow less relevant than more recent information or younger viewpoints. Perhaps most painfully, identity denial sometimes comes from those closest to us, family members or longtime friends who continue to relate to versions of ourselves that we've outgrown or that represent only selective aspects of who we are. They may cling to roles we once fulfilled, seeing us primarily as the caregiver, the responsible one, the family peacemaker, without recognizing how we've evolved or the fuller dimensions of our personhood. The research on identity recognition in later life reveals its profound importance. A study followed adults over 65 for 7 years and found that those who reported feeling seen and known by at least some key people in their lives showed greater psychological resilience, reported higher life satisfaction, and even demonstrated better physical health outcomes than those who consistently felt misunderstood or narrowly categorized by others. Another form of identity denial involves what researchers call biographical stripping, the tendency to reduce older adults to their age, health status, or care needs rather than continuing to engage with their full life history and multifaceted identity. Suddenly, you become the stroke patient in room 215 rather than the accomplished professional who had managed departments and traveled extensively. Visitors might talk about you in the third person while you're present, or address basic questions to your companion instead of to you directly. Research confirms that this biographical stripping occurs frequently in healthcare and institutional settings, but can also creep into family and social relationships, particularly when physical or cognitive changes occur. A study found that older adults who maintained relationships in which their life history and identity were actively engaged with reported significantly higher quality of life than those whose current circumstances had overshadowed their broader identity in the eyes of others. Protecting ourselves from identity denial requires both internal resources and external strategies. Internally, maintaining a strong sense of self-knowledge becomes increasingly important as we age. Regular reflection on our values, preferences, and the aspects of our identity that feel most essential can help us remain anchored even when others fail to recognize these dimensions. Journaling, life review practices, or conversations with those who do see us clearly can strengthen this internal coherence. Externally, clear communication about how we wish to be seen and engaged with becomes essential. This might involve direct statements. I've spent most of my life focusing on others' needs. Now I'm learning to prioritize my own creative interests, and I'd appreciate your support in that. Or it might involve more subtle redirection. When someone slips into speaking to you like a child, responding in your most articulate and complex manner rather than mirroring their simplified communication style. Sometimes protecting ourselves from identity denial involves curating our social circle more intentionally. This might mean seeking out relationships, whether with peers, younger individuals, or professionals, where our full selfhood is recognized and engaged with. Community centers, learning programs, interest-based groups, and intergenerational initiatives often provide contexts where older adults are valued for their experience and ongoing contributions rather than defined by age or limitations. For those in caregiving relationships, whether receiving care from family members or professional caregivers, establishing clear expectations around identity recognition can be particularly important. This might involve creating what some elder advocates call a dignity profile, a document that shares key aspects of your identity, preferences, accomplishments, and history that you want acknowledged and respected, even as care needs evolve. Let me share with you the story of Margaret, who found herself increasingly frustrated with how her adult children were treating her after she moved closer to them following her husband's death. They meant well, she explained, but suddenly everything was about managing me and my needs rather than engaging with me as the person I've always been. They'd make decisions about my social calendar without consulting me, explain things to me that I already understood, and talk about me to doctors as if I weren't in the room. Margaret's breakthrough came when she finally sat her family down for a frank conversation. I told them I was still the same person who'd raised them, managed a department, and traveled the world. I needed their support in some areas, yes, but not their management of my entire existence. While the conversation was initially uncomfortable, it transformed their relationship. Her children began consulting her rather than directing her, and engaged with her as the complex, capable person she remained despite some new physical limitations. Robert's experience offers another perspective on identity denial. At 83, he found himself increasingly marginalized in community board meetings, where he'd once been a respected voice. People would talk over me or respond to my suggestions with excessive patience, as if humoring me, he recalled. Rather than withdrawing, Robert developed a strategy. Before meetings, he would send thoughtful emails outlining his key points, establishing his engagement before any age-based assumptions could take hold. During meetings, he deliberately referenced current research and information to counter any perception of being out of touch. It shouldn't have been necessary, he acknowledged, but it effectively reminded them that my intellect hadn't expired with my retirement. These experiences highlight an important truth. While we can't control how others initially perceive us, we can influence those perceptions through clear communication and consistent self-presentation. Sometimes this means gently educating others about the diversity of aging experiences rather than accepting stereotypical treatment. Other times, it means seeking out contexts where age diversity is genuinely valued rather than merely tolerated. For Eleanor, a retired professor who had always valued intellectual engagement, finding these contexts became a priority. After several disappointing experiences with community groups where her expertise was consistently overlooked, she eventually connected with a lifelong learning institute affiliated with a local university where instructors and participants spanned ages from 55 to 95, and where her academic background was respected rather than dismissed. Finding people who engage with my mind rather than just seeing my age made all the difference, she explained. It's not that I deny the reality of aging. I acknowledge my limitations when they're relevant, but they're only one aspect of who I am, not my defining characteristic. This balance, acknowledging age-related changes when relevant while refusing to be reduced to those changes, represents a key aspect of maintaining identity integrity in later life. It requires a certain resilience, a willingness to gently but firmly correct misperceptions and redirect interactions toward more authentic engagement. Sometimes it also requires humor, as James discovered when dealing with medical professionals who defaulted to speaking to his adult daughter rather than directly to him. I started responding with intentionally complex vocabulary and detailed questions, he chuckled. It quickly reset their assumptions about my cognitive capacity. While these strategies can be effective, they shouldn't be necessary. Ideally, our social circles would recognize aging as a continued journey of development rather than decline, engaging with the evolving person rather than a static image frozen in time or reduced to stereotypes. When we encounter people who naturally approach us this way, who see us in our fullness rather than through the narrow lens of age, these relationships become particularly precious. They affirm our continued growth and recognize that wisdom involves not just accumulating experience, but integrating it in ever more complex and nuanced ways. Thomas, at 85, described such a relationship with his 32-year-old neighbor, who regularly sought his perspective on everything from career decisions to relationship challenges. "He doesn't come to me because he thinks I have all the answers," Thomas explained. "He comes because he values that I've seen patterns unfold over time, that I can offer a longer view. And then he brings his own fresh perspective to the conversation. We both walk away enriched." This mutual recognition of value, across generations and life stages, represents relationship reciprocity at its best. I want to take a moment now to address something important. If you've recognized some of these challenging relationship patterns in your own life, please know that this isn't a reflection on your judgment or intelligence. Many of these dynamics develop so gradually that they would be difficult for anyone to detect. Furthermore, our natural tendency to see the best in those we care about, a generally positive trait, can sometimes make it harder to recognize when relationships become imbalanced or harmful. The goal in identifying these patterns isn't to create suspicion or isolation, but to empower you to nurture relationships that truly support your well-being. Sometimes when we discuss these topics, people worry that setting boundaries or limiting certain relationships means becoming selfish or hard-hearted. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, thoughtfully allocating your relational energy creates more capacity for genuine reciprocal connections. It's not about building walls, but about establishing healthy gates, knowing when to open yourself to engagement and when to protect your well-being through appropriate limits. This kind of discernment gets easier with practice. Start by simply noticing how you feel after interactions with different people in your life. Do certain relationships consistently leave you feeling energized, seen, and valued? Do others reliably drain your energy, undermine your confidence, or leave you questioning yourself? These emotional responses offer important data about relationship dynamics that deserve your attention. Once you've identified concerning patterns, consider what kind of adjustment might be helpful. Sometimes a direct conversation can transform a relationship, particularly when the other person isn't fully aware of how their behavior affects you. Other times, gradually reducing frequency of contact while increasing investments in more positive relationships proves most effective. And yes, in some cases, particularly when confronted with intentional exploitation or manipulation, more significant distance or even ending relationships may become necessary for your well-being. I want to emphasize that this discernment isn't about becoming cynical or suspicious. Rather, it reflects a mature understanding that not all relationships serve us equally well at every life stage. Some connections that worked perfectly well in our younger years may become imbalanced or problematic as circumstances change. Recognizing these shifts isn't a failure, but an opportunity to realign relationships in ways that better serve current realities. Think about the relationships in your life right now. Which ones leave you feeling most alive, most seen in your fullness? Which ones seem to diminish rather than enhance your sense of self? While we can't control how others choose to relate to us, we can make conscious choices about where to invest our precious relational energy. These choices become increasingly important as we age, and our emotional and physical resources require more intentional allocation. I hope our conversation today has offered some useful frameworks for thinking about the relationships in your life. Remember that protecting yourself from potentially harmful dynamics isn't selfish. It's an essential aspect of self-care that allows you to show up more fully in the relationships that truly matter. If you found value in today's discussion, please consider sharing this video with others who might benefit. Subscribe to our channel for more content that honors the continuing journey of growth and discovery after 70. And remember, discernment in relationships isn't about closing your heart. It's about directing your precious energy toward connections that truly deserve it. Thank you for joining me today.